Hi, I'm Tom Casper, the editor of American Woodworker magazine. I'd like to talk to you about a simple shop aid that I use an awful lot in gluing things up. I call it a squaring block, although, heck, it's just a big L. But the secret of the squaring block is that it is an exact right angle. I'm going to show you what they're used for and how to make them. Let me give you an example of what I would do with a squaring block. Here's a drawer, a dovetailed drawer box that I'm gluing up. Of course, it's just fake glue on it, so you have to imagine that. But after you put all the pieces together, you really got to make sure the darn thing is square. And I would measure from corner to corner. But of course, the problem is on something like this, how do you force it into square after the glue is applied and all the pieces are together? Well, here's where I use squaring blocks. I've got two here, and I've also added some pieces onto them temporarily, of course, which enables the squaring block to sit at just the right level around the drawer box. So after gluing the drawer together, you just start clamping the two L's of the squaring blocks, and I would use two of them on opposite sides to force everything square. Get one side clamped, put a clamp on the other L, and just start forcing the box into being square. And when you're done, everything is all lined up, you are sure that you have a square glue up. Let me show you how I make these squaring blocks. They're really just two pieces of medium density fiberboard, MDF, glued together. Of course, you could use any kind of plywood to make them out of. Doesn't really matter. Two pieces together form a pretty stiff L, though. This thing isn't going to bend at all. So we're going to start out with two pieces of MDF, and they are different sizes. One's a little bit larger than the other one, and I'll show you why I do it this way when we move along to the table saw later on. Anyway, start out with two pieces. We're going to glue them together. And in order for the bond to be as good as it can be, you don't want any voids in this thing, we're going to be using a really simple method of cawls and clamps to force it all flat. So we'll get started here in a second. Okay, on to the glue up. Just one thing I want to mention before we begin though, the larger of the two pieces has to have absolutely square corners on it for this whole method to succeed. So let's glue them together. I'm not going to use anything fancy to apply the glue. I'm just going to squeeze it out like this. Nice big pattern. Then place the small piece on top of the big piece and push down and try and squeeze out as much of the glue you can to make the glue line as thin as possible. And here's where the two sizes come into play. As you probably know, gluing two things like this together, if they were the same size, it's really hard to get the edges to all line up. In this case, I don't really care if the top one is a little skewed or not. It won't matter. So I just want to see that there's a more or less even margin all around. Then set it on top of my cawls. These distribute clamping pressure. If you were just to put clamps directly on the two pieces, you'd need a whole bazillion clamps in order for it to work out. But as it is, I only need 4 clamps. Secret to clamping something like this is just to put a little bit of pressure on to begin with, and then go around and tighten them all up a little bit more, and around until you've tighten them as hard as you can. And that's it. Okay, here is our glue up magically, just like that. I didn't worry about, as I said before, whether this piece was exactly even with the larger bottom piece. As you can see, this is a pretty uneven line here. But what I didn't want is any of the glue to seep over the edge here. I scraped that off before it hardened, because we're going to be writing this edge along the fence. So of course you don't want any bumps or anything else along it. Now what I'm going to be making is one squaring block for one of these blanks. This blank that I made is the smaller part of it is just a little bit, about a 1/4 inch all around, smaller than the squaring block. But a more efficient way to make these things would be to start with slightly larger blocks that are rectangular. And imagine a big blank being this size, and this being the waist inside here. So you start out with a rectangle. It's a little more complicated making the bandsaw cuts and stuff. We'll just keep it simple. But anyway, if you want to make a whole mess of these things, and I think you should have a minimum of 4 in your shop, then you might want to start out with this shape. Okay, so let's go to sawing. I've set the saw up to cut this width right here, just like that. All right, now that all the cutting is done, we're going to make an L. Obviously, we can't cut the insides of the L on the table saw. We're going to go over to the bandsaw and do that. But here's an easy way to lay that out. I'm just going to take a stick that is the width of one of the legs, lay it on my piece here, and just draw like this. And I'm going to do that on both sides, because sometimes you never know which way is going to be up when you're bandsawing. Okay, now we're going to form the 2 arms of the L by cutting them on the bandsaw. And the real critical cuts on these squaring blocks are the outside cuts, because obviously these 2 sides have to be dead square, and that was easy to do when we started out with a blank that was absolutely square. The inside cuts have to be reasonably straight, and that's about it. I like using a fence for something like this, though, because then I don't have to think so hard when I'm pushing the wood through the saw, but it really doesn't matter. I'll show you again why I drew lines on both sides. We're going to put the blank into the saw this way, take it out, and then in order to saw the other line and leave the fence where it is, I just flip the thing over like this. The reason I drew the lines is so that I know where to stop cutting. So let's get it going, okay? Okay, now that those 2 cuts are done, there's just one more thing you want to do, and that is whack off the inside corner of the squaring block so that any glue squeeze out won't adhere to the squaring block and prevent you from removing it. Although I do put a coat of finish over the whole thing when I'm done here. The other thing that's smart to do is to cut off the corners or round them on a disc sander or something all the way around, because MDF plywood, whatever it is, tends to get dinged up on sharp edges. So let's just cut these corners, okay? So, done deal. Absolutely square block, corners knocked off, put finish on it, you're good to go.